Paul Ryan stepped in it earlier this week when he seemed to indicate that the cause of poverty in America is you damn lazy black people. Decide for yourself in this audio tape.
That's this tailspin or spiral that we're looking at in our communities. You know, your buddy Charles Murray or Bob Putnam over at Harvard, those guys have written books on this, which is we have got this tailspin of culture in our inner cities in particular, of men not working, and just generations of men not even thinking about working or learning the value and the culture of work. And so there's a real culture problem here that has to be dealt with. Everybody's got to get involved. So this is what we talk about when we talk about civil society. If you're driving from the suburb, to the sports arena downtown by these blighted neighborhoods, you can't just say, I'm paying my taxes, government's going to fix that. You need to get involved.
So instantly a great deal of criticism, people saying that him using the inner city in that way is code words for black, basically. Here's an example. This is Representative Barbara Lee, a Democrat from California, who says, my colleague Congressman Ryan's comments about inner city poverty are a thinly veiled racial attack and cannot be tolerated. Let's be clear, when Mr. Ryan says inner city, when he says culture, these are simply code words for what he really means, black.
Yeah, I disagree with her. I don't think it's thinly veiled.
It's thickly veiled.
Yeah.
It's
or no, not veiled.
Yeah, it's just not veiled. Yeah. It's veil free. He just didn't say the word black.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Does anybody think that there's a different meaning of inner city?
Yeah.
Like, so the ironic thing here is that if he just said culture in terms of where we stand, as he later amended in rural areas and inner city, etc. Okay, we'll get to his excuse in a second.
Because that's not racial either. when you point to the rural areas.
Yeah, that means white. So that would be a way of saying I'm blaming all poor people, not just poor black people, right? Then you could have an interesting conversation about, hey, what's going wrong culturally that we're not emphasizing education? What do we have to fix in that regard? It's a tough conversation where people are still going to get offended, right? Yeah. But at least we're having a possibly productive conversation into what's going wrong in the country and fixing it. Instead, this is a way of saying welfare queen, they're lazy, etc., and it's just blacks.
Yeah. They're getting those gifts from the government.
Right. I was wrong about Paul Ryan, and I think a lot of people were wrong about Paul Ryan. I sort of thought that he puts a nice face on things. He's dumb.
Oh, that's interesting.
Like, I don't think he's evil. I really don't. He quotes Ayn Rand and Charles Murray without having any clue what they mean to people, who they are. I mean, Charles Murray, and John and I were talking about this before, and I confused him with someone else. But I mean, this is the bell curve guy. This is a guy who says blacks are dumber. They're born dumb.
Yeah.
Because they're black.
It's irreparable.
Because their
genetic
skin
difference.
is pigmented differently. They're not as smart as the rest of us.
What makes him sound dumbest to me in that little speech he gave is the fact that he's overlooking the fact that these sports stadiums that they've built haven't really benefited the neighborhoods they've been built in.
Right.
Isn't that the point that he's kind of missing? That the incredibly gigantic tax breaks and all of the money that was poured into these things with the promise of gentrifying neighborhoods hasn't happened.
It's funny, it's happened.
And it doesn't happen in not just Minneapolis, but it doesn't happen in LA, and it doesn't happen in cities across America. All right, I'm done.
Yeah, no, look, and it's funny because one of the places where it has happened effectively, and I don't know to the extent that they'd hope, is Washington, D.C., which was where the MCI Center, I don't even know what it's called now, where the Capitals and the Wizards play. And the old owner built that. Like, he built it himself. I'm sure he got some tax breaks and was encouraged to do it, but he paid for it with his dollars that he had in the bank, And so I just think it's ironic that an owner who was like, no, I don't take your money. I'll build it. It's my team. I'll build it, and we'll help, and hopefully you'll encourage me to build it. And now there are a bunch of restaurants, and it's a nice area of town. Yeah. But they didn't get the tax breaks for it.
Now, really fast, just because I know that many people watching this, conservatives who happen across their videos, are going to say, oh, you guys are being too hard. Inner city. That could mean so many different things. Occasional TYT contributor David Sirota did a search. We have a graph we're going to show for you. This is the frequency by year of the term inner city in books in this massive Google, I guess, compendium. And you can see that it spikes in the 60s going through to the 70s. And this is the quote from From David Sirota, the term basically only started being used in the lead up to and immediate aftermath of the civil rights movement's legislative successes, at precisely the moment the conservative political backlash to the civil rights movement came into vogue. And apparently they were scared enough by those legislative successes that they began to hide, at least to some extent, their racist terminology through terms like inner city, now more recently like thug.
And the guy who he quoted, Charles Murray, who's just a racist in a suit. Yeah, I mean, literally talks about that. He says that that all these the country is filled with white people, and they know there's something wrong with these black people, but they can't put their finger on it. Yeah. And it turns out I'm here to tell them that it's okay. They're dumb and lazy.
He goes further than that, and this goes to an earlier point that Ben made about Paul Ryan and his sophistication, right? So he was smart enough to read Ayn Rand. It's an interesting book, right? But he's not sophisticated enough to realize its possible downsides. Like, for example, he talks glowingly in public about Ayn Rand, and they're like, hey, you idiot, you're running for vice president. Ayn Rand was a massive atheist. That might be some political trouble for you. He's like, oh, golly gee, oh my God, I didn't think about that.
With money.
Oh, yeah, and who was terrible with money, and by the way, at the end of her life took government support and is a massive hypocrite, and also because of her Superman theory, supported and looked up to a mass killer. Okay, she thought like, oh yeah, way to be beyond morals, be your own man. So, but Paul Ryan doesn't know a lot of this, and he lacks sophistication. Not that he's evil, but just is.
He's a very simple thinker.
Right, and when he talks about Charles Murray, somebody must have told him, hey, Charles Murray is a professor. He's
fellow at the American Enterprise Institute.
Exactly, and it's okay to quote him, but he didn't even read one page of Charles Murray, because if you read Charles Murray, not only does he say all the things that Ben mentioned, he goes on to say we should not have affirmative action or help. And I thought, wait a minute, that's kind of counterintuitive, because if you think black people are less intelligent than white people, shouldn't you help them more? No, he says, no, they're so stupid that they're hopeless.
Right, that's right.
And Paul Ryan, thinking about running for president again, ran for vice president, quotes Charles Murray in public like, oh, and your buddy Charles Murray. Yes, okay, that's what I mean by inner city.
He's a simple guy, Paul Ryan.
He is, and the language is really dangerous. When you start talking about the culture of work in a place you've never lived, and you start pointing your finger at those people, that's rhetorically dangerous shit. It's really ugly. If he had lived in, say, Detroit for the past 10 years, working to sort of close the gap between the 8 Mile and downtown, and worked and said, here's what I found out. But that's not it's on my drive to my box seats from my house.
Right.
I see a problem with the culture of work.
Yeah.
What?
He doesn't know those people.
It's funny,
weird.
Brian, I thought the exact same thing. I thought, who has he talked to? What professor of urban studies has he spent any time with? Even a conservative professor of urban studies. What mayors of big cities has he gone and talked to? Has he met with the head of housing and urban development, or any of their lifelong career bureaucrats who are working, the civil servants who understand the problem? Of course, he's done none of it. We don't need to know the answer. We know what he's done is exactly what you said, which is get in his Chevy Suburban and go to Bucks games, and gone through some neighborhoods that made him lock his doors.
After being criticized extensively over a few days, Paul Ryan came back with this statement saying, "It is clear that I was inarticulate about the point I was trying to make. I was not implicating the culture of one community, but of society as a whole. We have allowed our society to isolate or quarantine the poor rather than integrate people into our communities. The predictable result has been multi-generational poverty and little opportunity. I also believe the government's response has inadvertently created a poverty trap that builds barriers to work. A stable, good-paying job is the best bridge out of poverty."
That's a good. That's what he should have said the first time.
You know why?
At the minimum wage, which we will not raise.
Yeah, and that's a fine point to make. And the reason he said that at that point is because he didn't say it.
That's right.
Somebody on his staff wrote that and then released that as a statement.